Your Lenten theme is impossible until it is done. And I want to propose something for Albury and for St Matthew's that will strike some of you as impossible, that is, until it is done. But first, as context, I want to share with you what I believe to be the two most significant things, the most significant facts about our contemporary Australian society, and of course Albury is not excluded from that. The first fact is that we Australians are suffering from an epidemic of anxiety, and that's part of a larger mental health crisis. Last year, 2 million Australians were diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, and that was just last year. 1 in 3 Australians, it's estimated, will suffer some significant mental health episode, mental illness episode during the course of their lives. That's the first fact. The second fact is that we are more socially fragmented than at any previous time in our history. And what do I mean when I say more socially fragmented? I mean things like this. A quarter of Australian households now contain just one person. And we're rapidly moving to the point where within the next 15 years or so, a third of Australian households will contain just one person. That's not necessarily a tragedy, and it doesn't necessarily mean that all those people are lonely or socially isolated, but it does mean that the risk of loneliness and social isolation is again higher than it's ever been in our history. Other signs of social fragmentation: between 30 and 40% of contemporary Australian marriages will end in divorce. And we know, many of us will have experienced that personally or in our own extended families. We know what pain and dislocation and fragmentation, not only of the couple, not only of the family, but of the micro-communities that they belong to, generally result from a relationship breakdown, and we're looking at that now on a huge scale. 1 million Australian kids live with just one of their natural parents, and half of them, 500,000 kids, are migrating once a week or once a fortnight from the home of the custodial parent to the home of the non-custodial parent for an access visit. Disruption, fragmentation. We're living with a record low birth rate. And why is that significant in the context of social fragmentation? Well, anyone who's had kids knows that kids tend to act as a social lubricant in the community. The kids get to know each other, the families get to know each other, and when children are in shorter supply than they've ever been in our history, then that social lubricant is similarly in short supply. We're more fragmented because we're more mobile, and we're more mobile in two senses. We're on average now moving house once every 6 years. If you've lived in the same house for the last 30 or 40 years, imagine how often some other people must be moving to get the national average up to once every 6 years, exactly the same figure as for the United States. But of course we're also more mobile in the sense that car ownership is now almost universal. We tend to drive almost everywhere in our little capsules, usually only one person per capsule. Your neighbour comes and goes and you wave at the car, assuming the neighbour is driving it. That's not quite the same as stopping on the footpath and having a chat. We're more fragmented because we're busier than ever before. Why we're busier than ever before is something of a mystery. But there are many factors that contribute to it, and one is that in most Australian households where there are two adults living together, they are both working at least part-time. And that's a symptom of a generally busier society in which the time and the energy that we might once have devoted to engagement with and nurture of our local neighbourhoods and communities is in shorter supply than ever. We're more fragmented because of the information technology revolution, which is the great paradox of modern life, isn't it? It promises to bring us all together. It makes it easier than ever for us to stay apart. And there are many advantages, there are many blessings that flow from the information technology revolution, but certainly it's confusing us. It's dislocating us. We are confusing, I think, the transfer of data with human communication. And traditionally, for as long as humans have been on the planet, human communication has required human presence. We need to be in the same place at the same time, making eye contact in order to communicate. But now we think of the mere transfer of digital data as communication. And that revolution has also, of course, redefined our understanding of personal identity and of the notion of privacy. Well, I could go on. This is all familiar to you because we're all living through this, but these are some of the signs of a more socially fragmented society, and you can see what the cumulative effect of those sort of changes would be. Clearly, they tend to produce less stable, less cohesive local neighbourhoods and communities. They tend to produce communities in which people know each other less than has been historically true for societies like ours. And the other cumulative effect of all of this social fragmentation is that it's fueled an obsession with the self. We've seen the rise of the so-called me culture, reinforced by consumer marketing, reinforced by the happiness industry, the promises that suggest we should all be happy, we should only ever think positive. And the cumulative effect of that is that it's all about me and my prosperity and my comfort, and it's all about me and my happiness. Well, I said at the beginning that I wanted to present the two central facts about contemporary Australia, but I'm sure it's already occurring to you that what I've been describing are not two facts, an epidemic of anxiety and a record level of social fragmentation, but only one fact. These two apparently different facts are in fact inextricably connected to each other. They are like two sides of the same coin. Heads, we're more socially fragmented. Tails, we're more anxious. Why? Obvious, isn't it, that we humans are by our nature, it's written in our DNA, that we are social creatures. We desperately need each other. We need communities to support us and sustain us and nurture us and protect us. To feel cut off from the human herd is to experience anxiety. This is why in our prison system, the worst punishment we can inflict on a convicted criminal is solitary confinement, to insist that a person be cut off from the human herd. So our experience as a society, as a nation, our experience of anxiety on this scale is a symptom of our increasing social fragmentation. Social fragmentation increases the risk of isolation. Isolation increases the risk of feelings of exclusion. Feelings of exclusion increase the risk of feelings of alienation. Now, the beautiful symmetry about the human condition is that not only is it the case that we as humans are hopeless in isolation, we desperately need each other, we desperately need the sense of belonging to a human community, but the symmetry is that those communities, and we've seen it in many villages and towns around Australia and through the history of the world, those communities don't just automatically survive. Communities only happen when we make them happen. And they only survive when we engage with them and contribute to them and lend our energy to the process of constant community development and renewal. So the tragedy of contemporary Australian society is that on a very large scale we are not living as if we need each other, though we do. We're not living as if our own health depends on the health of the communities that we belong to, though it does. So what's to be done? The answer to our dilemma can be captured in one word, and that word is compassion. Compassion is the antidote to anxiety, because compassion is the magic ingredient in the life of any community. Through an attitude of compassion, we learn to act with kindness even towards those we don't like or don't find attractive in any way. We learn the discipline of compassion. We learn to make compassion our hallmark, our way of life. Which brings me, in conclusion, to Albury. What if we made a compassionate Albury our goal? It's been done in the town of Frome in Somerset in the UK, a local GP recognising precisely the kind of symptoms that I've been talking about this morning and the increasing health problems in the community, not just mental health, but health of other kinds too, launched a Compassionate Frome project which was widely embraced by the community. And a 3-year study of that project showed that across many medical indicators, one dramatic one, admissions to hospital emergency departments across Somerset in that 3-year period, emergency hospital admissions went up by 29%. In the town of Compassionate Frome, they fell by 17%. And general health improved across most indicators. A local palliative care physician, reflecting on the success of this project, said, "No other interventions on record have reduced emergency admissions across a population." And what were those interventions? They were things like encouraging people to get to know their neighbours, to keep a watchful eye on the lonely, the elderly, the frail, the isolated, to provide easy access to people in financial stress to professional financial advice, to encourage people to join choirs, to participate in community gardens, to encourage blokes, though in Frome they don't call them blokes, to join the men's shed, and a series of trained community connectors were developed to help people with medical difficulty find social support in the community. These, of course, were not revolutionary initiatives. These were the things that compassionate people of goodwill do anyway. These were the sort of things anyone can do in any town, including the city of Albury. An initiative that says we'll always smile, we'll always say hello when we pass anyone in the street, or standing at the bus stop or wherever we happen to be, whether we know them or not, whether we like the look of them or not. The sort of initiative that says if someone needs me to listen, I will listen because I know that's the greatest gift I can give someone. It's the sort of initiative that says to all of us, we'd better join things, we'd better engage more, we'd better participate more, and above all, we'd better look out for the lonely. It only needs a few people, it only needs one parish to begin the process of transformation of a community, a town, a city in this way. My favourite miracle in the New Testament is the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. And I hasten to say, though I may offend half the people in the church, I don't for one moment believe that this is a description of a historical fact. I don't have any faith in the idea of the literal truth of any of these miracles, especially not that one. But I do have great faith in the thundering metaphorical power of the miracle stories. And this one in particular, a little boy's lunch, a few loaves of bread, a couple of fish, feeding 5,000 people. Of course, impossible until it is done metaphorically. And to me, that miracle is not about bread and fish. It's about compassion. It's about loving kindness. It's a miracle that says to us, every act of kindness, every act of compassion will multiply, and before you know where you are, one might have led to 5,000 acts of compassion and kindness. Why couldn't that happen in Albury? And why couldn't it start in St Matthew's? Impossible? Only until it's done. Amen.